Welcome back to another episode of Basic Baking. My name is Nick, and today we're going to begin our cake recipes in the Basic Baking series. So we're going to begin with our red velvet cake. I have shown you guys how to make my red velvet cupcakes and my cream cheese frosting. It's basically the same recipe, and we're going to be using the exact same cream cheese frosting in this cake recipe, because in my opinion, guys, cream cheese and red velvet cake is basically a match made in heaven. And it is actually my favorite cake flavor. I get asked a lot what my favorite flavor is. This is it. To make this cake, we are going to begin by adding some flour into a large mixing bowl, along with some sugar, baking powder, bicarb soda, some salt and cocoa powder. Now today we're going to be using a handheld mixer, and once you have all of those ingredients mixed really well, we're going to add our wet ingredients. So we're going to add some eggs, oil, we're going to add some buttermilk, some vanilla extract. Now, vanilla extract in a red velvet cake recipe is really important. You want to use a really good quality vanilla extract, and you want to use lots of it. I have been known to pour an entire bottle into my red velvet cake recipe because I think that it's so important, and you really want to be able to have that perfect balance of light cocoa flavor from the cocoa powder and vanilla cake flavoring from the vanilla extract. We're going to be adding some red food dye. I know that some people don't like using food dyes, but that's what I use in my recipe. And we are going to be mixing everything together. Now, you want to mix on low speed. You don't want to mix on high speed because you risk over aerating the mixture and over mixing. So mix long enough so that you don't see any dry ingredients. When you can't see any dry ingredients, stop mixing, scrape down the bowl, because you never fully get the bottom of the bowl perfectly if you're using a hand mixer or a stand mixer. So always scrape down and then mix for a final 30 seconds. Now I have prepared 3 8-inch cake tins with some oil spray and baking paper, and we're going to distribute our cake mixture evenly amongst those cake tins. If you want to learn more about how to prepare your baking tins for different types of baking tins for different types of cakes, I've actually made a separate video showing you guys how I do it so that you get perfect results every time. We're going to bake our cakes. Once they're baked, we're going to let them cool down completely. Now, I actually like to cool my cakes in the fridge overnight so that when I slice them in half, they're nice and chilled and not too crumbly, and that makes them easier to work with. Now, I've just trimmed the tops of my cake off using a large serrated knife. You don't have to do this, but I do recommend doing it because you get nice level layers and your cake just ends up looking nice and neat. So once you've trimmed the top off, take them out of the cake tin, and then you are going to use a cake leveler or that serrated knife to trim your cakes in half. So that way you'll end up with 6 layers of cake. Now let's move on to putting our cake together. So we're going to fill it and crumb coat it. So I am going to be using a thick 10-inch cake board today. And the reason I use the thick ones is because as you're transferring your cake in and out of the fridge, it doesn't bend, so it makes your cake really steady. And I just like using the thick ones because it's easier to transfer your cake around. So I would recommend the thick ones, and I buy mine online from like Amazon. So we're going to add a dab of my cream cheese frosting on top of the cake board. And we're going to spread that around using an offset spatula. So when I'm decorating cakes, I like to use an offset spatula. It's got kind of a bend in it, which means that as you're decorating, you have less risk of your fingers touching your cake as you're spreading frosting around. I would recommend having one of those, and I would also recommend having a bench or cake scraper to get those nice perfect cake edges, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. We are going to pop our cake or our first layer of cake on top. We're going to firmly press that on top of the frosting to make sure it's stuck to the cake board. And then we're going to pipe a ring of cream cheese frosting around that first layer of cake, fill it in with some more frosting, and then we're going to spread that around nice and evenly. Once you've got it nice and even and flat, you're going to add your next layer of cake and repeat that until you've got all of your cake layers on your cake. Next, we're going to be crumb coating. Crumb coating is a really important step because you're trapping those cake crumbs in your first layer of frosting, so that when you've chilled the cake after you've crumb coated it, they don't show up on your final layer of frosting. So you end up with a nice, clean, neat cake. So to crumb coat, we are just gonna add some frosting around our cake, add a little bit more on top, and I'm gonna use my offset spatula to just spread it around the cake and then spread the top. I'm going to use my bench scraper to just get it nice and neat. Now, you don't have to make it look perfect because it's going to be covered up with more frosting, but I'm a perfectionist and I like to make it look really neat. So I'm going to make it look neat on the sides and the top. We're going to pop this in the fridge. I recommend chilling for at least 4 to 5 hours. I actually chill overnight. And you might be thinking, Nick, you made this cake 2 days ago. Isn't it going to dry out if you put it in the fridge for 2 days? Well, it's actually not, because when you do that crumb coat, you're actually sealing up the cake and you're trapping the moisture in, so it actually gets more moist. So we're going to pop this in the fridge, ideally overnight, and then we're going to come back and add the final decorations. You're going to add the final layer of frosting on top of this cake, and so what you want to do is you want to start at the bottom of the cake, go around as you're spinning the cake turntable, and work your way up to the top of the cake. Once you have the sides covered, you want to add some more frosting on top, and we are going to use a bench scraper to spin our cake turntable, holding our bench scraper nice and straight, and go around the cake. As you go around the cake, you'll notice that you'll have frosting on your bench scraper. So as that frosting builds up, you want to scrape it off the bench scraper with the offset spatula, and then keep going around the cake until it's nice and smooth and neat. Now, if you notice any gaps in your frosting as you're going around the cake, you can just fill them up with more frosting and then scrape those off with the bench scraper. Once you've got the sides looking nice and neat, we are going to use an offset spatula to scrape the excess frosting around the top of the cake. You want to make sure you're holding your offset spatula nice and level and straight as you're going around. Once you've done that, we're going to finish this off by going around with the bench scraper. Now, this is the secret to getting nice cake edges. Once you've gone around and you've got it looking nice and neat, and guys, this took me about a year to learn how to do, so don't feel bad if yours doesn't look perfect. For some people, it can be like a lot of practice, and that I was one of those people that needed to practice. Once you've got it looking nice and neat, you are ready to add your final decorations. So you know those excess tops that we trimmed off the top of each cake when we baked it? I actually popped those into a food processor and turned them into crumbs. So we're going to be using those crumbs to decorate the bottom or the sides of our cake. So similar to how I do that ombre effect with sprinkles, we're going to be doing that with our cake crumbs. So starting heavy on the bottom, and then as you make your way up to the top of the cake, adding less and less cake crumbs to give it kind of an ombre effect. Now, this step is silly, and I don't even know why I did this because it didn't really work that well, but I used a cake cookie cutter, a 6-inch one, and popped it on top of my cake and then put some crumbs in there. And I thought that it was going to look like a nice round piece of crumbs on top of my cake, except when I lifted it, the crumbs kind of just spread everywhere. Whatever. I just did that. You can do it as well, but you don't have to do it. I fitted the end of my piping bag with an open star tip, and I frosted some swirls of cream cheese frosting around the top of my cake. And that is pretty much it, guys. Now, if you like, you can drizzle some chocolate sauce on this cake, because chocolate goes really well with red velvet cake. You can even use chocolate frosting for this cake. It'll taste really delicious. If you want to make this cake for yourself, I have left the recipe as a link in the description box below for you guys. Click on that link, it'll take you to the recipe. And if you do make this cake, let me know on social media, because I'd love to see your lovely creations by tagging me. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all on the next episode of Basic Baking on the Scran Line. Bye.